Divrei Torah.
Beautiful. Amen. Amen. Blessed are you, source of all life, who has created this sacred time and space for us to experience your sacred words and revelation. Text sheet, please. Yes, McKaylee. It's a very eager bunch. Okay.
You're not supposed to be reading the chat, though. You're supposed to be just focused.
It just came up, like it came up into my screen, so it doesn't matter. Okay, I'm going to share my screen without any further ado. Oh, host disabled participant screen sharing, McKaylee. I know there's a way to do this. Are you there, McKaylee?
Yes, 1 second, because
Okay.
that shouldn't be.
No problem. I just wanted to make sure we were communicating.
Oh, there we go. You should be able to now.
Oh, great. We're doing Tamar and Yehuda, and it's an extraordinary story. Let's see if this works. Let's see. Is this working? Do you see the source sheet? Nod your head. No. Really? No? Okay. Let me try it again. I think this is it. No, that's not it. All right, let me stop my share. I don't know why it didn't work. All right. Yes? Great. Okay. So we've been, like my theme has been, and my interest has been this whole idea of midah keneged midah, or to put in the language of another tradition, which I hope I'm not doing violence to, karma. And, here in this chapter, which is a very cruel and tragic chapter, chapter 38 of Genesis, there is a moment of redemption that comes through all the pain and tragedy. Just so a few words about the literary structure of this moment in Genesis. So in chapter 37, we kind of go deep into the Joseph story, right, which starts our Parsha, Vayeshev. And from now until the end of the book, which is what, chapter 43? I think it's chapter 43. 45. Something. 50. No. Sorry. I think it's 50. Someone will put that in the chat. It's all about the Joseph story. It's all about Joseph's descent, and then, descent, ascent, descent, ascent, and then ascent, ascent, ascent. And it's also about the mess of the family dynamics between Joseph and his brothers, and the eventual reunion between Joseph and his father, Jacob. So there are beautiful moments, and there are many difficult moments between Joseph and his brothers. But here, so chapter 37, Joseph, chapter 38, Judah and Tamar, or what happens when Judah leaves his brothers. And then chapter 39, we're back to the Joseph story. So we're now in this kind of, snapshot of Judah and his life surrounded by the Joseph story. And there are all kinds of literary connections between Tamar and Judah and that story and the Joseph story. So we'll look at that. All right, so we're going to dive into Tamar and Judah and see how it connects to the rest of the stories and the stories we've been looking at, not only the Joseph story, but, the other stories we've been looking at in Genesis. Okay, so about that time, Judah left his brothers and camped near a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira. So Vayehi ba'etahi. So I guess, around the time that they threw Joseph into the pit and had their brothers sold into slavery. Vayared Yehuda me'et Echav. So here, it's not only that he left his brothers, he went down, right? He went down. There's a descent here. And also Joseph goes down into Egypt, right? There's this sense of really spiritual descent, I think. So he goes away from his brothers. Vayet ad ish Adulami ushmo Chira. And he camped near a certain Adulamite whose name was Chira. Okay, hanging out with his friend. He seems to become a friend. Okay. Vayar Sham Yehuda bat ish Kanani ushmo Shua. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he took her. vayikacheha, presumably for marriage, and he slept with her. Vatahar vateled ben vayikra et shmo Er, and she conceived and bore a son, and he named him Er. Vatahar od vateled ben vatikra et shmo Onan. She conceived again and bore a son and named him Onan. Verse 5, Hey, vatosef od vateled ben vatikra et shmo Shelah v'haya b'chziv b'lidata oto. Once again she bore a son and named him Shelah. He was at Kaziv when she bore him. Okay, verse 6. Vayikach Yuda isha le'er b'charo ushma Tamar. So Judah took a wife for his oldest son, Er, and her name was Tamar. Sorry, I'm just looking at okay. Vayihi Er b'chor Yudah ra be'enei Adonai. So Er, the eldest son of Yudah, was evil or bad in the eyes of God. Vayamitehu Adonai, and God killed him, basically. So we don't know what Er did wrong. We don't know why Er was evil in the eyes of God, but we just know that God swiftly punished Er. So that's Tamar's first husband. Vayomer Yudah Onan ba el eshet achecha vayabem ota v'hakem zera le'achicha. So Judah says to his second son Onan, go and sleep, lay with your dead brother's wife, and I don't exactly know how to translate this, but this is kind of this is a precursor to the law of levirate marriage, and the law has it that if a man dies, then his brother should marry the widow to raise up seed or children for the dead brother, so that he's not left without some kind of legacy, and his name will have like children and land. Okay, so sorry. So where were we? Vayabem ota v'hakem zera la'achicha, and raise up seed for your brother. Vayeda Onan kilo lo yiyah. So Onan is like sort of assessing the situation, saying, this seed is not going to be named for me. V'haya im ba el eshet achiv, and when he was supposed to have sexual relations with Tamar, with the wife of his brother, v'shichet artza, instead of coming into her, he dropped his seed on the ground. Levilti natan zera lachiv, so he wouldn't give seed to his brother. So he wants to keep his seed all to himself. Vayera be'enei Adonai asher asa vayamet gam oto, and this was evil in the eyes of God, and he also struck him down, dead. Vayomer Yudah l'Tamar kalato. Okay, so far, Judah has lost two sons, right? And, he has a third son that he's supposed to give to her, because that's the way it works with levirate marriage. But instead, he says this, Vayomer Yudah l'Tamar kalato. So he says to his daughter-in-law, Shavi amana beit avich. Go sit as a widow in the house of your father. Ad yigdal Shelah, until Shelah grows up, the youngest son, Shelah beni. Ki amar, because he said to himself, Pen yamut gam hu ke'achav, because he said to himself, like, he's going to die just like his brothers. Like, in other words, it's not, in Judah's mind, it's not the fault of the brothers. She's a lethal woman. Whoever she marries dies. Vatelech Tamar vateshev beit aviha. So she goes to sit in her family home. And she's basically what we call now an aguna. Like, she's stuck. She's basically anchored until she can marry Shelah. She can't marry anybody else, right? So she's completely stuck. Okay. Now, one other interesting little detail: the name of the youngest son, Shelah, actually means belonging to her. So the narrator's telling us this guy belongs to Tamar, but Judah is withholding. Okay, so now a couple of pieces, one piece of midrash, and then one more piece of text, and then I'll open things up. Okay. So here the midrash is addressing the fact that right after Jacob's heartbreak for his son Joseph, who he thinks is dead, we have this story, right? So the rabbis are making sense of that literary proximity. And we have this midrash that says, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Judah, until now you had no sons and did not experience the grief caused by sons. But since you tormented your father and deceived him with the words, Joseph was without doubt torn to pieces. By your life you shall wed, bury your children, and suffer the grief that comes with children. Just read this in Hebrew. Amar lo hakadosh baruch hu liyudah, ein lecha banim ad achshav, ve'ein ata yodea et sa'ar banim. Ata tiganta et avicha, v'hit'eta oto b'taruf toraf Yosef, chayecha. Tisa isha v'tikbor banecha v'teda sa'ar banim. So you will know the grief that your father, that you made your father experience, right? So this sense of poetic justice, or a kind of literary retribution here. Okay, so now let's see what happens with Tamar. So vayarbu hayamim v'tamat bat Shua eshet Yehuda. So a long time afterwards, Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, dies. Vayinachem Yehuda. And Judah, it's a little hard to translate this, perhaps is done with his grieving, or he grieves and then moves past his grieving. Vaya'al al gozezet sono, hu v'chira re'ehu, ha'adulami timnata. So Judah went up to Timnah, to his sheep shearers, together with his friend Chira, the Adulamite. We started the whole story with Chira, this minor character. It's a little mysterious. Vayugad letamar lemor. Okay, so someone's telling Tamar, right? It was told to Tamar. We don't know who's telling Tamar, but it seems like someone's looking out for Tamar, right? And remember, there've been a lot of days. I presume by Yerbu Hayamim means there are a lot of years, right? The wife dies, and then finally, Yudah goes to a kind of a sheep shearing festival, which we can imagine, had food and drink and God knows what. Okay. V'yigadla Tamar lemor, hine chamecha ola timnata. Lagoz Sono. Your father-in-law is coming up to Timnah for this sheep shearing. So she's got little spies around. She has connections in the community. Vatasar bigdei almanuta me'aleha. Vatichas b'tzeif. Vatit alaf. Vateshev batpetach einayim asher al derech Timnata. Ki ra'ata ki gadal shela. V'hu lo nitna lo l'isha. So she took off her widow's garb, covered her face with a veil, and wrapping herself up, sat down at the entrance to Einayim. So she sits at the crossroads of a place called Einayim, which means eyes, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw, because it's named eyes. Why? Because she saw that Shelah was grown up, yet she had not been given to him as wife. So as I said, years have gone by, and she knows that Shelah is hers, and that she should be given, he should be given to her in marriage, and that has not happened. And she's sitting there as a widow, so she finally takes off her widow's garb, and she acts, right? And she acts in a way that other women in the Torah act, right? Miriam stands back and watches what happens. She's the one who sees and picks the right time, the one who sees and picks the right moment for acting. And Rebecca also, she's eavesdropping. They're all watching and waiting for that right moment to execute their own mission. So Judah saw her and thought she was a prostitute because she covered her face. So remember, she veiled herself. So now my understanding is that in this region of the world, prostitutes did not veil their faces, from the research I've done. However, maybe he thinks she's a prostitute because he can't recognize her because she's veiled, right? And because of where she is on the road. So women that were married or younger women who are not yet married typically did not hang out on the road. Vayet aleha eleha el haderach vayomer hava na avo elayach ki lo yada ki kalato he v'tomer mati tenli ki tavo elai. When Judah saw her, he took her. Oh, I'm sorry. So he turned aside to her by the road and said, "Here, let me sleep with you," for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, "What?" she asked. "Will you pay for sleeping with me?" So she's, kind of strategic in that question, and you'll see why in a minute. Vayomer anochi asher. Sorry, I can't see this. Let me just make it a little bigger. Ashalach gedi izim min hatzon, v'tomer im titen aravon ad shalchecha. He replied, "I will send you a kid from my flock," but she said, "You must leave a pledge until you have sent it." So she wants a guarantee, right? She wants something to know that he will come back with his payment. And we'll see what she does with that pledge. Vayomer, ma ha'eravon asher eten lach, v'tomer chotamcha upitilecha umatcha asher bi'adecha v'yiten la v'yavo ilaha v'tahar lo. And he said, "What pledge shall I give you?" And she replied, "Your seal and cord and the staff which you carry." So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she conceived by him. So Robert Alter, the great Bible scholar, says that, or he takes a literary approach to the Bible, says that this is the equivalent of giving someone your credit cards and your license, right? So all his symbols of identity. Okay, v'takam v'telech v'tasar tzifa me'eleha v'tilbash bigdei almunuta. So she went on her way. She took off her veil and put on her widow's garb. So she went back seemingly to the way she was before, but not at all, because now she's pregnant. Vayishlach Yudah gedi ha'izim. Okay, so that's interesting. We'll see why in a minute. Biyad re'ehu ha'adulami lakachat ha'eravon miyad ha'isha v'lo mitza'ah. So 20, Judah sent the kid by his friend the Adulamite to redeem the pledge from the woman, but he could not find her. Vayish'al et anshe mekoma lemor ayeh hakadesha hi be'inayim al derech vayomru lo hayta b'zeh kadesha. So he inquired of the people of that time, "Where is the cult prostitute, the one at Einayim by the road?" But they said, there has been no prostitute here. So note there's a change in the word used to describe prostitute. Before it was zonah, which means a straight out prostitute. Kadesha has the word kadosh, holy, in it, right? That root. And some think that a kadesha is a cult prostitute. And there's a sort of scholarly disagreement of whether a cult prostitute sleeps with the men there. It's not really clear exactly what a kadesha it is. However, what I think the narrator is communicating to us is that there's something kadosh, there's something holy about what she's doing. She's no prostitute. She's like, she's just doing something more lofty. She's the one with the long view. She's the one with continuity on her mind. 22. Vayashav el Yudah v'yumar lo mitzatiha v'gam anshe makom amru lo hayta bazeh kedesha. So he returned to Judah and said, "I could not find her." Moreover, the townspeople said there has been no prostitute, again, sacred prostitute here. Vayomer Yudah tikach la peniyeh lavuz hine shalachti hagadi hazeh v'ata lo mitzatiha. Judah said, "Let her keep them, lest we become a laughing stock. I did send her this kid, but you did not find her." Okay, so one more small piece, and then I'll take comments. Okay, in Breshit Rabbah, another piece of Genesis Rabbah, just this little line here. "The Holy One, blessed be He, said to Judah." So this is about the fact that she was supposed to send her a kid, right? And the Holy One, blessed be He, said to Judah, "You lied to your father with a goat kid." So remember, the brothers took Joseph's coat of many colors and dipped it into the blood of a goat that they had slaughtered. So too Tamar lies to you with a goat kid. And if you remember as well, Jacob lied or deceived his father with the skins of a goat kid on his arms, pretending he was Esav. So there's this, intergenerational use of goat kids to deceive. Okay, so now I am stopping my share. There's a lot more to do, but we will have a discussion first. Okay, so I see Jay.
With apologies to Nehemiah, I have a pun I wanted to share, but maybe it's best left for the end.
Now we have two people then. Nehemiah, I'm going to call on you at the end. Okay.
I could do it now if you want, but I just thought.
It's okay. We'll leave it for the end.
Okay.
Anyone else want to say anything now? Thoughts, questions? Ashachayim.
You have us all intimidated because you say you get one shot, and I keep thinking there'll be something more interesting later on. That's why the chat is so great. It allows us to release these little things as they go along.
Excellent. Excellent.
So what do I do? I mean, do I burn my one card now?
Do it, Ashachayim. Do it.
Tamar took off the cloaking and put back her big day almunutah.
Yeah.
The big day of her widowhood.
Yeah.
And you read that word slowly, and I heard Gedi.
I know. I was about to make a mistake.
Of the goat.
I know.
As well as bagad, which is to trick or deceive.
Yes.
Not so much in that particular locus of stories, but that word is so loaded.
Yeah. So these big days, so the clothes in Genesis are often, bogade. They're deceiving in each generation. Yeah, absolutely. So again, we have a story in which there's there's deceiving in identity, right? He doesn't know that he sleeps with his daughter-in-law. Jacob didn't know that he slept with Leah instead of Rachel. Jacob didn't know that, Isaac didn't know that it was Jacob in front of him instead of Esav. And then we talked about the original trauma, the Akedah, right? How could Isaac possibly process that it was his father standing above him wanting to kill him? Right. And so from that moment on, we've got issues with deceit and identity and sort of like the face-to-face encounter in every generation.
Back up one more story to Lot and his daughters, where Lot has been drinking heavily and doesn't recognize.
Nice.
And here, when you say sheep shearing, there's drinking going on.
Yes. And that verb lahakir, to recognize, we see it in every one of these stories, the lack of recognition. Okay, I'm just gonna quickly look. Okay. Yeah, Abraham passes off his wife as his sister. Nice. I never made that connection. Okay, I'm just looking quickly at the okay. All right, Alana.
I was also struck by some similarity here to the Akedah. Well, first I just want to say just there's such beauty and power of the naming of this place, this crossroads, where Tamar sits. It's a crossroads.
Literally the opening of the eyes. Petach Einayim.
Right, the place of seeing.
So poetic.
Yeah, and that there's this theme of what do you see and what don't you see?
Yeah.
What does Judah see and not see? Does he not see? He doesn't see. In some ways, for me, it evokes like not seeing his own responsibility with Joseph, with his own sons. What kind of father was he as well? The story suggests that there's some kind of repetition of some pathology here, that both of his sons were so troubled. And then I think of Tamar in terms of the Akedah, that she is in this impossible situation, that in this place of change, in order to step into the line, she has to sell herself. Like there's something sacrificial about this moment that that she takes on.
Wow.
And is she sacrificed or not? She has to be disguised and enter into this liaison and pretend that she's a prostitute. Like, so in some ways, there's something that's sacrificed
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
her. And then,
Absolutely.
yeah, just to see the story from her perspective
Yeah.
and what's the spiritual journey for her, and just that ambiguity and complexity that continues in the tradition and echoes about the Akedah. Like, what was that?
Right. She steps into the story with like this incredible strategy. Like she knows how to play Judah and how to get what she wants. And yet you're right. She's sacrificing herself. Okay. So Sharon, Yaakov, Paul.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Two things are striking me. One maybe more trivial than the other, but just on the, I thank you for pointing out the difference between Zonah and Kadesha. And I love what you said about it, the hints of Kedusha in the word.
That's how I read it, yeah.
Yeah, I'm also wondering if, the first time when it uses Zonah, it sort of says, Yehuda thought she was a Zonah, which seems to be sort of a plain prostitute. And then when he's looking for her, he says, where is that Kadesha? I just wonder if looking for a cult prostitute is a more sort of reputable thing to do.
Interesting.
Prostitute. So that's one kind of small.
He's like covering up his tracks a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that.
And then the other thing I just hadn't noticed before is, the death of the sons is so shrouded in mystery, but with the death of Onan, with the second one, there is a hint there of this is a brother who does not want to do for his brother what is expected of him. And so there's hints of that sibling rivalry, tension, or, at least a lack of sort of being willing to stretch beyond oneself for the sake of one's brother.
Which is the theme in all of Genesis, right? No generosity with one's brother. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I never thought to connect that because it's a family apart, but you're so right. All right, Yaakov.
Hi, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Thank you so much. This is lovely learning. I enjoy it so much. So this to me is that it's the hiddenness of things, the action that are so hidden, and that we see with the lying, with the sort of kind of untruth, and we see that with Rivka, and we see that with. So it's a powerful thing because the hidden is really turns. I love the word from Zonah to Kedesha. It elevates, as you spoke. It elevates into something that we see God's action as he puts himself into this. Into what is his purpose for us? What is his connection? How does he turn the history, the moment? And it seems like lying. It seems like it's like lying. It seems something hidden that doesn't seem so nice or good, and yet it's so powerful because it moves history the way God wants it to turn with us, in that relationship between the hidden and the seen. So it's all kadosh. Even the things that seem so like the worst of human nature is somehow sublime and powerful and beautiful because it takes us to a better, higher place.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, Yaakov. And it's amazing. I mean, Genesis is such a mess, and yet God's will and God's vision is somehow implemented through this mess. And we're gonna look at the Midrash in a few minutes that's saying exactly what you're saying. So hang on to that. By the way, remind me, where are you in the world? I can't hear you.
In Winnipeg, not far from Jay.
Toronto.
Oh, nice.
Toronto, sorry. Not far from Jay.
Nice. Okay. All right.
We're friends, actually, with Jay Broadbar.
Okay.
Thank
Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to go to Paul, Eliu, and Barbara, and then back to the text. Okay, so 3 concise comments, please. I'm getting used to this new time, by the way. So it's like, oh, I don't have a lot of time. Okay, go ahead.
A question rather than a comment.
are pondering this meta narrative of deception, and the Torah, the 5 books were supposedly provided to Moses in one fell swoop. So God has provided this narrative to us. And so my question is whether the commentators that we see most frequently comment on that, what God is trying to do with the underlying themes of these stories, including the one that we're pondering, which is deception.
Yeah. So we're going to look at a midrash in a few minutes that I just alluded to that I think is going to address that question. So hang on, and we'll see if it satisfies.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Barbara.
Shabbat shalom. I guess I want to think about this from Tamar's point of view, and as really an act of liberation for women, right? Because women don't have a lot of agency in these stories, as you were saying, about everybody watching and waiting to take their action. The men are in action and doing all interesting things, and sometimes the women are, and obviously the women are sometimes deceptive too. But by taking her life into her own hands and trying to get the result that she wants, which is, I don't want to be a prisoner in my father's house for the rest of my life, which is how it was going to turn out if she didn't, because he wasn't giving her the third son and she doesn't have recourse to remarry. It becomes, a first step towards liberation. And I think that I'm sure there's a lot of midrash on this, but I just wanted to
absolutely. And I think
conversation.
I think her taking off her widow's garb is so liberating and just such a powerful image. And how many of us feel like we're stuck in our lives, and like she just like, enough with the stuckness, I'm going to do what I need to, no matter what it takes,
whatever the consequences.
Yeah.
Right? And even there aren't any good consequences for her either way, right? She's basically has no life, living in her father's house. She has no rights. She hasn't, she's still a child then because she's living in her father's house. And so it really doesn't matter.
Exactly. Yeah. She risks everything to go on with her life. Exactly. Okay, Eliu.
In the book of Genesis, all the time, see or not seeing, the mass of sin or not sin. I think in the book of Exodus, the importance of listen. So I remember that all the time we say, Shema Israel Adonai Eloheinu, not see God Adonai Eloheinu.
Nice.
Because there's another type of knowing. That see or not see is very mess all the time.
Beautiful. So in Exodus, there's a lot about hearing, and there's also a lot about seeing. And then in Deuteronomy, the emphasis is on hearing and exactly the Shema. Like we shift to, instead of the spectacle, the voice. Beautiful, Eliu. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go do some more text, and then I will come back to you all. Okay, let's see. Do you see the source sheet? No. All right, I'm going to try it again. Let's see. Do you see it now? Excellent. Okay, so let's see what happens. Okay. Asher Chaim, do you mind reading a little bit? Are you there?
Honored to read. I just have to find my place. Here we are. Vayhi kimeshu. Oh boy. Vayhi kimeshalosh shanim achadashim. About 3 months later, Vayugad lihuda lemor zanta tamar kalatach. I'm sorry. I'm going to zoom this up so I can read it better. There we are. Zanta tamar kalatecha, it was told to Yehuda, quote, your daughter-in-law Tamar has violated sexual norms. V'gam hine hara liznunim, and behold, she is pregnant by this illicit relationship. Vayomer Yehuda hotzi uha v'tisaref. Yehuda said perfunctorily, take her out, let her be burned.
Okay, let me just insert a couple of thoughts, which is, first is it's 3 months, so she's starting to show, right? Her pregnancy is starting to show, and the biblical narrator is sensitive to that. And also twice here is the verb used that's associated with the zonah, the whore, as opposed to the sacred prostitute, kadesha, right? So there's nothing here in the way that's being, presented about her story that's redemptive. She's just a whore. She's acting like a whore. Okay.
He mutzeit. She is being brought out. V'hi shalha el hamiha. And she sent to her father-in-law, Lemor, quote, Leish asher elle lo anochi hara. It is by the man to whom these things belong that I am pregnant. Vatomer, and she said, Hakerna, identify, Lemia hotemet v'haptilim v'hamateha elle. Who is the owner of the signet seal and the cord and this staff?
Okay, great. And I just want to emphasize hakerna. So she says, recognize these, please recognize these. So until now, right, earlier, he did not recognize her. That same verb was used. Let me just make sure. Lo yada. Here it's lo yada. But it all, which means he did not know that it was his daughter-in-law. But in all those other stories that we mentioned, with Isaac and Jacob, he did not recognize that same word is used. And with Joseph and, with the brothers, Joseph's brothers, presenting the coat of many colors dipped in, the blood of a goat, Jacob does not recognize what the brothers did, right? So there's all this non-recognition. And here she says, recognize, which interestingly enough, and we'll talk about this in a few minutes, is the first stage, according to Maimonides, of tshuva, is to recognize. Okay, 26.
Vayaker Yehuda, and Yehuda recognized. Vayomer, and he said, Tzadka mimeni, she was more righteous than I. Ki al kein lo natatiha l'shela b'ni, because that's why I had not given her to Shelah, my son. V'lo yasaf od l'da'atah, he no longer had intimate relations with her.
So he's saying, she's more righteous than I am because I didn't give her my son Shelah in the way that I should have, right? Okay.
Vayhi ba'et lidetah v'nei te'omim bivitnah. And at the time of her birthing, there were twins in her womb. Vayhi b'lidetah vayten yad. As she was birthing, one put out its arm. Vatikacha miyaledet vatikshor al yado shani lemor ze yatsa rishona. The midwife tied on its arm a bright thread saying, this one emerged first. Vayhi kimeshiv yado. But the boy brought his hand back in. V'hinei yatsa achiv, and his brother was born first. Vatomer, and she said, Ma paratzta alecha paretz. Why did you breach a breaching? Vaikra shemo paretz, and he called his name Paretz. V'achar yatsa achiv asher al yado hashani vaikra shemo Zarah. And then his brother, who had the thread on his arm, was born, and he called his name Zerah.
Okay, so Zerah had the crimson thread on his arm. And what's interesting is that Peretz, the one who created the breach, is the ancestor of Boaz, who married Ruth, which leads us to the Davidic line, right? The line of King David, which leads us ultimately to the Mashiach, the Messiah, and the redemptive line, right? So this is not any ordinary woman, Tamar. Somehow, she is, a mother in this incredible genealogy, along with Ruth and the daughters of Lot, and all these other, matriarchs and patriarchs that we've seen until now. But what's interesting is that Tamar is not an Israelite woman, right? So she's probably a Canaanite woman, although it doesn't say that directly. Ruth is a Moabite, and they're central figures in this, Davidic line. Okay, so here's the midrash that I keep referring to that I absolutely love. It's one of my favorite. Okay, so, and thank you, Asher Chaim. Okay, so Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman Patach. So Shmuel Bar Nachman is sort of opening up by interpreting a verse. Ki anochi yadati et hamachshavot shvatim. Okay, so that for I, God, know the thoughts. Okay, so the shvatim hayu asukim b'mechirato shel Yosef. So the brothers, or the tribes, more literally, were busy or involved, actually busy, with selling Joseph. The Yosef haya asuk b'sako b'tanito, and Yosef was all busy with his sackcloth and his fasting. Reuven haya asuk b'sako v'tanito. Reuven was all busy with his sackcloth and fasting. V'Yaakov haya asuk b'sako and tanito, and Yaakov was grieving, as you remember, and he was busy with his sackcloth and his fasting. The Yehuda and Judah haya asuk likach lo isha, and Judah was busy taking a wife for himself. And what was God doing? V'hakadosh baruch hu haya osek borei oro shel melech hamashiach. And God, or the Holy One, blessed be they, was busy with creating the light of the Messiah, of the King of the Messiah. So, and this points back to what Yaakov was saying, right? Through all this mess, somehow redemption's being created. And also, I hope, Paul, might be addressing your question. Like, what exactly is going on here, and where's God's vision in all this, right? And I think what happens in Genesis, in this like very messy book, is that, again, through all these family dynamics, an Israelite family is being created, which is God's project. And ultimately, the nation will be created through, I guess depressingly enough, through slavery and liberation. Okay, so one more thing about Judah and Tshuva. So I mentioned that the first stage of Tshuva is recognition, hakara, and then is charata, regret, which Judah does later, I think. And confession, or revealing, and he does, confess to Tamar, like, I was wrong in that I did not give you my youngest son, and not repeating the sin. So he doesn't continue to sleep with her, which was not exactly his sin. But later on, there's an even more profound tshuva, which my friend Sharon reminded me of this morning. And has its well, I don't know how to pronounce this word. Apotheosis? You know what I'm trying to say? It's sort of apex in this moment here, where Judah has come forward and has approached Joseph and says, now your servant has pledged himself for the boy to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, I shall stand guilty before my father forever. So, Ki avdacha arev et hanar me'im avi lemor im lo avienu elecha v'chatati lavi kol hayamim. So he stands as the pledge, right? He gives Tamar, she teaches him something about pledging himself, right? He now stands as the guarantee, as the pledge for his father not losing his younger son Benjamin and not causing his father more grief. And he puts himself on the line, right? It's like, here what he does in this story is withhold. And then later he comes forward and he offers himself completely. Okay. Stop my share and see who would like to speak. Alana. Hi, Alana.
Hi, Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.
Two quick thoughts. One on that last one. I think in the idea of redemption, that the redemption and the tshuva doesn't necessarily happen in relation to the person that maybe the harm happened with. That sort of like with what happened between Judah and Tamar. That idea that he then, from her example, it doesn't need to impact their relationship. It impacts a different relationship. Like he goes back. That's just interesting in thinking of like when you do tshuva. And like, even if you're like apologizing to somebody or demonstrating something, it might not be in that relationship that the healing or the tshuva, like something happens, but it also maybe happens in a different place too.
Yeah, something happens between Judah and Tamar because she's not taken out and burnt.
Right, right. Yeah. But
no small.
And they have kids, and yeah, I mean, there are things that happen, but it's not. I guess like in her demonstrating that shifted him in other relationships. Maybe that's what it is. It has that other effect. The other thing I was thinking is, I think like there's one read on this that like, what is God's role, or what, like I'm hearing a lot of these lessons as maybe there's something in the partnership with God, that it's not, we don't just let things happen, but that we actually have to act outside of what seems to be prescribed to realize ourselves or to realize where we're going. And I think that's sort of that question of like, is it destiny? Is it God? Or is it actually in the human action? Or are they both the same anyway? So like
go ahead.
No, just in that midrash that you offered, or in that reading of it, it's like God was doing something, was finding redemption, but was it God, or was it the actors, the people finding that in their own messy relationships?
Yeah. So what is how is the redemption being affected? Like, are we calling it God, or are we calling it something else? But what's interesting about Genesis is that so many of the women are on the side of, according to the Torah at least, God's plan, right? So Sarah's on the side of Yitzchak. Abraham seems to be identified with Ishmael. And then Rebecca's on the side of Yaakov, right, as opposed to Esav. And then here, and here, like, Tamar does exactly the thing that produces the messianic line. So it's just so interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. But there's something for me that's challenging in that of like, on God's side, are the women, like the women being the channels through which God's action is happening, or are they just individual actors? Like we've been birthed through this, we've been created, and then we go out and do what we do. I mean, this is my own like thing of like,
I didn't totally understand your last point.
But just like, is it, so the women are carrying it, are like stand-ins for God, or the creative force, the acting force of God in the narrative, or are they their own beings with their own free will doing things that happens to align with where God is going, but is it actually God prescribing that?
Yeah. I think I'm on the side of your number two, like they're individual beings and their wills happen to align with God's.
Okay.
I don't see God pulling the strings here, if that's
I think that's the question I'm sort of like asking there.
Yeah, that's not how I understand it. All right, we'll hear what other people say. Sarah and then Margot.
Hi there, Shabbat Shalom. I'm wondering whether Tamar is actually raising yes, she is. She's raising the physical into the holy, which is what we're supposed to do in God's partnership. So as you said, Ilana, that we have a responsibility of bringing God's light into the world. It isn't passive, it is active. So we have a responsibility, like Tamar does, to bring God's light into the world, that we are sitting in the land of Canaan. This is from a reading that I did from the Maggid's table, that at the beginning, Yaakov is sitting in the land of Canaan. So what does that mean? We're actually present in the physical, and we have to bring God's light and somehow couple God's presence in our physicality. That's how we bring we bring God into our physical world. And I think that's what Tamara is doing, and that is what we're supposed to be doing. And women, through our ability to have babies, we bring the holy, we bring that act, and we have the potential of creating the upcoming Messiah. And it's often like unexpected. The second one is actually like the little boy, the Zorach. What was his name?
Sarah.
Zerach. So he's the one that actually has the crimson. So it's unexpected, but we have some agency, even though not in a typical way.
Yeah. And I want to connect a little bit to, from what you're saying to what Barbara was saying. Like, how do we know when to break all the rules? And also what Alana was saying. Like, how do we know? Like, how do we know when breaking all the rules is good and when it is bad? How do we know if we're like doing it for God's sake or for life's sake or for, the community or society's sake? And how do we, and when is it that we're just doing it for ourselves and it gets us nowhere and gets the community nowhere? Okay, Margot.
First of all, that was beautiful, Sarah. Thank you. I have a quick question, a bigger question, and a quick comment. So my quick comment is that the more I read this, the more parallels I see to the Joseph story. It's just really so incredible with the uncovering and the uncloaking and the identity and all of that. My quick question is, who's the male namer of Tamar's children? And my deeper question is Tamar...
When I was reading, I thought it was Judah. But that's
why
weird.
is Judah there at the birth? I mean,
yeah, that's so weird. You're right.
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Yeah. Okay. And my deeper question is, I remember being 4 years old, and my little 4-year-old friend, like on purpose, lied to me. And I said, whoa, people could lie on purpose. It was like this shocker. And there's a lot of lying going on here. But is Tamar lying, or to what extent is she lying when she just doesn't, she just goes along with Yehuda's presumption that she's a Zona. And the condition of being an Aguna, a chained woman, is a terrible flaw in the Jewish, the Yehudic condition. And so I thought perhaps she's akin to Tzlafchad's daughter. It is challenging, and God obviously blesses this challenge the way that God blesses Tzlafchad's daughter for saying, the case is righteous. And here the case is righteous, it's for life. To answer your question, it's for life. It's for righteousness.
Yeah. And she may not be lying, but she's clearly creating a false impression by veiling herself and presenting herself in a certain way. Like I think her transgression, like I don't want to soften it, because in a way I feel like I admire her even more with it. Like it takes a lot of courage to do what she did.
I agree.
Okay. All right. Any more? Yeah, I see you, Nechemi. Don't worry. You're on deck. We actually, since we have 5 minutes extra. So let me do one more text and I'll come back to you. Hold on. Share my screen. Let's see if this works. No, that didn't work, right? No, let's try again. Yes? Good? Okay, great. So the other thing, we've been looking at some of Jung's words in terms of like repeating what we don't, like if we don't completely acknowledge who we are and are blind to ourselves, then I'm not saying this exactly how he said it as a quote, but we're repeating, we're doomed to repeat something and call it fate. Like we keep doing the same thing and we almost feel like a victim of reality. That was his quote. This is related but a little bit different from Freud. The patient cannot remember the whole of what is repressed in him. And what he cannot remember may be precisely the essential part of it. He's obliged to repeat the repressed material as a contemporary experience instead of remembering it as something in the past. So here that's happening intergenerationally, right? Whether the original trauma of the Akedah is remembered or not, I don't know. but there seems to be something in the nature of trauma that you can't fully remember it cognitively, and you're destined to play it out again and again. But what's happening in Genesis is that's happening intergenerationally. And the key, it seems, to some kind of redemption is that hakara, is that recognition, right? There's repeated lack of recognition, until here, when there's a recognition. And not only did he recognize, like Judah recognized his seal, his signet, and his cord, but he recognized the implications of his action, right? That's the full recognition. I don't know about all of you, but I know personally, like until I'm ready, if someone points something out to me, I just don't get it. Until I'm ready to recognize it, I just don't recognize it. And then like a year later, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe how blind I was. Shocking. And I don't even know why I couldn't see what I could see now. And God knows what I can't see now, right? That I'll know in another year or 10 years, I don't know. But it's a very strange process, this process of going from complete emotional blindness to some recognition, at least in my experience. Okay, so I'm going to go now to Jay had something for us, and then Nehemiah.
I apologize in advance going from the sublime to the ridiculous, but a couple of years ago, we studied this in Tikkun Leil Shavuot, and I came up with this amazing observation, maybe because it was 2 a.m. in the morning, but this story has the first recorded incident of an IOU. EWE.
Love it, Jay. It's hysterical. Okay. Nehemiah. And then I'm going to ask people who haven't said anything. If you want to say anything, we have a few more minutes.
Shabbat Shalom, Yeshar Koach to everybody, and especially Yeshar Koach to the women. Not just the women in the Bible, the women in this group, for taking your power. And I'm today, I'm identifying with women and with Zerach. I'm a son of Judah. I hope I'm a pure Bar Yehuda, pure son of Judah. My father Zichrono Lebracha. And I'm identified with women because women have the power of intuition, the power to learn from inside, beyond the logic. They are connected to the God. Generally, you'll see them more in yoga classes, in all the places, because they are more connected to the divinity inside and not to just acting like parents, like men, like Israelis, So, and then I want to mention one more thing, is l'akara. It's so powerful what you said about akara. The philosophies that I follow beside Kabbalah, equally or even more sometimes, is called Kashmir Shivism, or the philosophy of recognition of the higher self. When you start to recognize what you are doing, you are moving towards recognizing who you really are. And once you recognize who you really are, you really become in line with spirit, and you recognize easily everything because the ego doesn't stop you anymore from seeing, like Freud described.
Thank you. Yeah. I want to say two things to you. I think what you're saying about women is beautiful, and a little part of me is resistant to what I hear as a little essentializing. In other words, women are this way and men are this way. So I'm a little resistant to that. I'm just responding to what you're saying. And
but I'm a woman.
Oh, okay, good to know.
I have a feminine in me.
Good to know. And the other thing I wanted to say is that, I actually find it more liberating when I recognize the dark places of myself than the higher places of myself. Somehow, because I feel a little bit freed from some kind of compulsion in those areas. That's my experience. But it's interesting.
You have to recognize them first before you go to the higher one.
Oh, okay. Then I can't wait to go to the higher place. I'm excited. Thank you. Okay, Amy from Tallahassee.
Hello, good morning. Shabbat Shalom.
Hi, Shabbat Shalom. So good to have you.
Thank you for having me. I know so often we look at things through our lenses, of our contemporary lenses. We measure it against what we're used to. But I can tell you, I'm not a member of the Public Defender's Office, but I have never seen in the news or anything somebody being prosecuted for not paying a prostitute. it would seem that the bigger crime is to be a prostitute than it is to not pay the prostitute.
Uh-huh. Interesting. In other words, okay, so unpack that. So where are you going with this?
Well, it's just interesting what the priorities were of the time. Our priorities today would not be
I
the same
see.
as
But
the priorities
yeah,
of
that
that
is
time.
so interesting. But it actually gives, it means that the prostitute had some weight and dignity. It's like you got to pay you got to pay, That's really
Yeah.
interesting what you're saying. Thank you. You're right. There's a reversal there.
Yeah, because today you'd be arrested for being a prostitute. The John
Exactly.
would not be arrested for not paying you.
Yeah, that's great, Amy. Thank you. Nice. Did I see Alana? Go ahead.
Just very quickly, that I had a similar thought to Nehemiah that that our lead character was working on intuition, that Tamar was working on an instinctive, intuitive reaction, not really knowing where it came from or why. That was just my thought about her.
That's interesting because there's also something about what she does that's so strategic. Like she sits at the opening of the eyes, like she's the one who sees. So it feels almost like there's this
But why?
integration in her.
What's her motivation is instinctive.
Yeah.
Not her actions, the motivation.
Well, the other thing I feel from her is like she can't stand being stuck anymore. It's like enough already. Like when do we get to that place? It's like, okay, enough with this dynamic, enough with this, whatever it is in your life, enough of the stuckness. Like when is the pain so, sort of visceral that we just say, I'm out of here no matter what. Okay, Harley.
So picking up on
word. Go ahead.
So picking up on the motivation, I think she sees what's actually going on because from the writer's point of view, it's all fated. There's no free will here. The play has been set. Everyone's playing their roles. The first son is a misnomer for evil. The second one is spilling his seed all over. The third one is actually hers, and Judah is preventing her from getting hers. And so Tamar, I never thought of this before, but Tamar realizes I have to intercede, no pun intended, in this play in order for me to get what is truly mine.
Yeah.
And so there was a counteraction to this writing divine, this thing, the story that was supposed to be told, she sets right.
Yeah, beautiful. It also brings to mind, like, when does reality seem completely immutable? And when do we decide it doesn't have to be this way and act accordingly, right? And turn everything over. With that, I'm going to leave you with that thought. And Michaela, can people hang out and talk to each other?
Yes, they absolutely can. I will stop the stream now. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you, everybody.